Right. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربنا زدنا علما. So the nice thing about coming after Dr. Human and Dr. Khalid is that they said half the stuff I wanted to say, so I can really cut my talk short, inshallah. But alhamdulillah, no, it's been really enlightening for me as well to hear them speak. And today my topic is talking about achieving spiritual balance. The reason I thought of talking about this is because in the therapy room, this is what I come across a lot. Also personally, I'm sure all of us feel that, balance is, we've talked about mental illness and well-being, that well-being and health is not just the absence of illness, right? And, all of these things that we talk about, grief and sorrow and anxiety, all of these things being natural parts of our life, the place where we run into difficulty is in finding balance. So I want to kind of throw it out there for you guys. When you think about balance in religious terms, what comes to mind? I just gave you guys a stretch break, so it shouldn't be so low anymore. What comes to mind when you think about balance? Moderation. What about like spiritually, religiously? Consistency. Okay. Holistic. Realistic. Yeah. Okay. So balance is like having realistic expectations for yourself. Okay.
I think a balance between, I suppose, spiritual activities versus dealing with like worldly matters, like making money, like family, like many such like balancing that.
Right. So balancing between our spiritual selves, our religious, obligations, and everyday life. Right. The run around having to go to work and family and all these things, a balance between that. And we know that one of the du'as that came to my mind when I was thinking about balance is a du'a in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us this du'a, that amongst people there are those who say, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً. Oh Allah, grant us in this dunya hasana, goodness. وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. And in the akhirah, grant us hasana, grant us goodness. وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. And save us from the fire. And and so this is a dua that represents balance, right? That we're asking for both things. Allah has taught us to do this, right? And in another part of the Quran, in Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. That certainly for you in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a beautiful example. And you notice that the same word is used. That Allah has taught us to ask in this dunya, for this dunya and for the akhirah hasana, something beautiful, something good. And He also has described the Prophet ﷺ as an example for us and used the same word to describe that, hasana, something beautiful, right? And so we know that the Prophet ﷺ is the best example for us, and He is the best example of balance for us in terms of how to live this life. We see the Prophet ﷺ, as Dr. Khalid mentioned, he was a human being who experienced a full range of emotions. We saw some examples in the previous talks of how he experienced grief and sadness, how he experienced worry, how he experienced, how he was when he was preparing for war. That's not something you walk into and say, okay, I'm fine. There's a sense of anxiety, maybe a little bit of fear that comes into play, right? So he was a human being that experienced a full range of emotions, and so we see his example as being the best example for us. A lot of times one of the issues that I run into, especially in Eastern cultures, within the Muslim community, when it comes to therapy, when it comes to seeking help, seeking counseling, is, what Dr. Khalid talked about a little bit, is that issue of normalization. We think, oh, I don't need to go to a therapist, I'm not crazy, right? Like I don't have like a psychotic disorder, right? And so there's this concept that we need to be having some sort of serious issue, some serious major mental illness in order to seek counseling, in order to seek help. But the Prophet ﷺ, we see how he relied on and he sought support from the people around him. He was not above seeking counsel. We see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counsels him throughout the Quran. Right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we know that you're grieved by these people, by the people who don't believe. We know that your heart aches, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ was given counsel by Allah Himself. We know that, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that it's okay, not only okay, but encouraged to hug your children, to show affection. And again, these are things that a lot of times we shy away from. That to let someone know, to have that kind of vulnerability, and to let someone know that I'm aching, that I'm hurting, that there's something wrong with that. But really, the beauty in the Prophet ﷺ's example is that he wasn't afraid. He didn't shy away from showing that he was hurting. He didn't shy away from talking about his pain. And so, what I want to talk a little bit about in terms of balance, hopefully a little bit from a practical perspective, and also integrating like the mental health framework and Islamic framework, is what you saw in the previous slideshow, in the previous slides with Dr. Human, is kind of the Islamic perception, Islamic lens through which we see mental health and well-being. So here we see that Muslim mental health, the way we view it, is with the heart in the middle, and that the heart is influenced by all of these other parts of us. So let's talk a little bit about that. The heart, we know in Arabic, is called the qalb, right? Qalb, literally something that goes back and forth. The literal meaning of qalb in Arabic is something that goes back and forth, right? The Prophet ﷺ, one of his most frequent du'as was, Ya muqallib al-qulub thabbit qalbi ala dinik. O turner of the hearts, make my heart firm on your deen, right? So the heart is something that goes back and forth, it fluctuates. And when we talk about our composition as humans, what are we influenced by? How do we, what do we do to ensure the well-being of our heart? Right? Dr. Human mentioned a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that there's a piece of flesh in the body that if it's good, the rest of the body is good. And if there's something wrong with that part, then the rest of the body is going to suffer, and that is the heart. And so we talk about how do we get to a place where our heart is healthy? Not just physically, obviously, but mentally, emotionally, because this is where our emotions are housed. So there are 4 parts to this, and hopefully I'll quickly go through all of them. The first, the easiest, thing for us to understand is the aql, is the intellect. The intellect is the thinking part of us, the part of us that functions to understand, to reflect, to process, to reason. It's something that grows with us through our lifespan, right? It's something that's constantly growing. So I'm smarter now, hopefully, than I was a year ago, right? And so we think about, therapy. A lot of times what we do in therapy is we say, okay, is this part, is our thinking affecting our heart? The way we look and perceive situations, right? The way we look at and perceive situations, is that affecting my heart? And I'll give you an example of this, how the Prophet ﷺ intervened with a young man who came to him. And he said, O Messenger of Allah, give me permission to commit adultery. Very human, right? Very just open. But he's coming asking permission for something that he knows is wrong. So in therapy, therapeutic language, you call this cognitive dissonance, right? There's something in him that says, but he goes and asks permission for it, right? So there's an internal battle. And the Prophet ﷺ, everyone starts saying, what are you doing? Stop it. Have some shame. You're talking to the Messenger of Allah, right? And the Prophet ﷺ very lovingly says, come here. And he calls the young man over and he has him sit down. And he says, would you like that for your mother? And the man says, no, I would never want that for my mother. And he said, would you like that for your daughter? And he said, no, I would never want that for my daughter. And he said, would you like that for your sister? And the man says, no, of course not. I would never want that for my sister. And the Prophet ﷺ goes on asking him about these various relationships. And he then didn't chastise him. He gave him, yes, he should respect all women, but this man wasn't. And so the Prophet ﷺ didn't chastise him. He didn't shame him. He didn't make him feel badly for having this urge. But he sat him down. He asked these questions. He gave him a different way of looking at the situation that would help him tame what he was feeling. It didn't make the urge go away, but it helped him think about it differently and therefore behave differently. And then the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. He said, oh Allah, forgive his sins, purify his heart, and guard his chastity. And so, this is when we talk about therapy, when we talk about finding a safe space to talk to someone. This is what we're talking about, finding a space where we might go and say, I'm having this kind of internal conflict, and it doesn't have to be something of this nature, and it might very well be. But it's talking about saying, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I know. And they don't match. And I'm grappling with this. And I'm struggling with this. How do I manage it? Right? And the benefit, obviously, when we're talking about Islamically integrated psychotherapy, and that's the beauty of what the work that Khalil Center does, is that we can take our deen, we can take our faith principles into account when we're talking about, okay, how do we reframe? How do we look at things differently? How do we think about things differently? Right? And this is something we work on all the time, right? So as a therapist, we're also always looking at saying, okay, where is the thought process? Maybe not seeing the whole picture. How do we broaden the lens, right? So we work on a cognitive level to say, how do we get the heart to a better place through a cognitive lens? The other part of this, the other side of this, or one of the other pieces, is the ruh, right? It's the spirit. It's our spirituality, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, the beautiful balance that the Prophet ﷺ struck even in this arena. I mean, he was a prophet. I mean, it doesn't get more religious than that, right? And yet he had to go and teach some of his sahabas not to be more religious than the religion itself. All right? So we know that there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ went to one of the companions and he said, "Oh, Abdullah, I've been informed that you fast all day and you pray all night. Is this true?" And the companion said, "Yes, O Messenger of Allah." And the Prophet ﷺ told him, "Don't do that. Calm it down. Right? Observe the fast sometimes and leave them at times. Stand for prayer at night and also sleep at night. Your body has a right over you. Strike a balance in this. Your body has a right over you. Your eyes have a right over you. Your wife has a right over you. These various aspects of your life all demand your attention, all demand that you're present. One of the things, especially living in New York, that we fall into is just this trap of being on the go all the time. We're like machines, we're like robots. How often do we take a moment to stop and say, you know what? Just going to take this moment in right here. And just pause. And recognize that what I'm doing, give my full 100% attention to what I'm doing right now. Whether it's praying, whether it's eating, whether it's just laying down on my bed. How often do we do that? We're so primed to look at the next task at hand. We're so primed to be on the go that we lose our sense of balance. And so another thing that we look at is, how do we find a sense of contentment? How do we find a sense of presence in what we do to balance our soul? Because, we're human beings and we're caught up in a culture of social media and comparing ourselves to others. And there's always something that will make me feel bad about myself because there's someone else who's doing it better, and there's someone else who, sees me in a different way that I don't want them to. And there's something that I don't like about myself, right? And so I'm constantly running and running and running and running. And part of what we have to do is say, stop for a second. And when is my running too much? Maybe when is it not enough? How do I fulfill the rights of my soul? Strengthen my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And do that not just through my prayer, because that's not the only thing that makes a person religious. How do I do that? Through my relationships with people. How do I do that? Through my relationship with my community. Right? We know that part of what promotes happiness and contentment is having a higher sense of meaning. Right? If you want to look it up, it's something you can read on later. I'll just mention it. The work of Martin Seligman, right? He works a lot in positive psychology. He has this model, the Perma Model, Perma, and this is his kind of like formula for happiness, right? And so just quickly to go through it, the P is positive emotion, learning how to feel good. Even in people who are happy, don't necessarily always feel happy, but they know how to think about things and reframe things in a way that gives them the ability to not sink into sadness, right? E is engagement, to like really have something in your life that really fulfills you, that you can kind of get engaged in, that makes you lose track of time, right? The R is relationships, so really investing in relationships and taking time to nurture healthy relationships and strong connections. M is the one that I want to come to, which is meaning. Having something in your life that's bigger than yourself. And when I first learned about this, I said, alhamdulillah, right? Like, as Muslims, we're given that. That's kind of a default, because as Muslims, we're not really doing what we're supposed to do if we are not engaged in something that's bigger than ourselves. If I live a life that is just completely about me and only me and centers around my world, I'm really not fulfilling my full rights or my full responsibilities as a Muslim, right? So meaning, and now, obviously the research and stuff, it's been in our tradition for years. So the topics of mental health and, counseling and seeking support and finding, these have been a part and parcel of our tradition since the beginning, right? And so our deen gives us a way of seeking meaning, of having something in our life that gives us a purpose to live. It might look different for all of us. I might be doing that through services in the mental health field. Someone else might be doing that in a different way, but we have an avenue to find meaning in our lives. Sometimes that's what we need to figure out. Sometimes that's what brings people. I think when Dr. Khalid asked, what do people make dua for, right? Somebody said, what's the purpose in my life? Sometimes that's what brings people into therapy. I'm not really quite sure where to fit myself, how to figure this out for myself. That's a valid question. You don't need to have a mental illness to be asking this question. You don't need to be, grief-struck to be asking this question. This is a valid enough question to come into therapy and say, I need some place where I can kind of figure this out. Right? Maybe your family all says to go down one career path and your heart's just not there. Right? But this seeking meaning is built into us. And we're so blessed in the Islamic tradition that it's part of who we are. Right? Now, the Prophet ﷺ, in the narration that I shared with you, the Prophet ﷺ warned his companion. He said, don't get so stuck in the ritualistic aspects of your religiosity that you neglect the other parts of who you are, right? He says, your wife has a right over you. Build your relationships. Don't neglect them. Don't shut people out, right? And the other side of that is the nafs, our behavioral inclinations. It's the physical side of us, our desires, if you want to call it that, right? And our deen, again, the Prophet ﷺ gives us so much wisdom with that. One simple, commonly known narration is the one where the Prophet ﷺ said, a human being fills no worse vessel than his stomach. And it is sufficient for a human being to eat just a few mouthfuls to keep his spine straight. But if he must fill it, if you must eat more than a few morsels, then 1/3 of food, 1/3 of drink, and 1/3 of air. Again, a balance. A sense of saying, okay, eat. Fine, enjoy your food. No problem. If there's like asceticism and you're like, okay, just the bare minimum. But yeah, if you want to eat more, if you want to enjoy your food, go ahead. But don't become a glutton. Don't revolve your life around food. Right? Don't make that the focus of why you live. And so again, the Prophet ﷺ, this is just one narration. Our tradition is, filled with it, right? We know that the nafs is something that can pull us towards evil, right? A lot of times, that's the discrepancy. We desire one thing, we want one thing, right? Falling into sin is logically I might know, my aql might say, this is not allowed, this is haram. I can't do this. But my nafs is going to say, nah, just do it. Right? There's a pull there. And so the heart is affected by that. These two things pull at us. Right? And so that's, again, balance. Finding a way to say, how do I honor my needs? Because our body does have a right over us. But how do I also find a way to balance that with these other parts of who I am? I am not just a vessel for food. I'm not just a vessel that just needs physical pleasure, right? This is one piece of a larger puzzle. And so again, the Prophet ﷺ in his wisdom teaches us balance in these things. And then ihsas, emotion, right? This is the crux of therapy right here. Emotion, right? This is the one where we struggle. This is where I don't know if I should say gold mines or landmines of marriage counseling come into play, right? The emotional aspect, right? So, I mean, just if I use that as an example, marriage counseling, you've got one partner that, when there's something goes wrong, they blow up, they can't stop, they pull out, all the stops, right, for everything. And then you have the other partner, so the emotional regulation is just not there. It's just like a pressure cooker, right? On the other hand, you might have the other partner that just shuts down, becomes like a locked up, treasure chest. You don't know what's going on. Complete shutdown, right? And so the emotional regulation, figuring out, how do I honor what I feel? How do I do that while also setting appropriate limitations and boundaries? How do I do that while setting appropriate limitations that allow people into my world and honor how I feel, and also create a space where I have safety, where I don't have to let people trample all over me, right? And we know the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that. In his beautiful hadith, he says, love who you love mildly. Perhaps one day you might end up hating them. And hate who you hate mildly. Perhaps they may become beloved to you one day. So even in our emotions, even if in our love and our hate, two of the strongest feelings we can have, the Prophet ﷺ teaches us to moderate it. Be aware of it. Don't get so infatuated that you lose yourself. And don't get so enraged that you lose yourself. Right? And so we see the Prophet ﷺ in all of these different domains teaches us about balance, teaches us how to moderate ourselves, teaches us how to, find wellness. Get onto the part of the spectrum, right? In the middle, right? Where we're not necessarily super happy, but we're able to manage ourselves, where we're not depressed, and if we do get depressed, that's okay. Again, I don't want to, make that's not the goal of therapy, to never feel depressed or to never feel anxious. The Prophet ﷺ taught us du'as for that very reason, right? Dr. Khalid, we'll skip through this because we're running out of time. But Dr. Khalid mentioned this du'a that I wanted to share with all of you, right? One of the things that, if you take away nothing else from what I talk about today, the one thing I want you to take away is that there is not only nothing wrong, but it's normal to feel depressed. It is normal to feel anxious. It is normal to feel angry. Our emotions are given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? In Surah An-Najm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى. It is Allah who makes you laugh and makes you cry. Your happiness, your grief, these are things that come from Allah. Our emotions serve a purpose. They propel us to make some kind of a change when we're dealing with uncomfortable emotions. Without that discomfort, we wouldn't do anything. And so it's normal. The goal of therapy is never to just say, okay, I'm going to get rid of all these uncomfortable feelings, because you might get rid of them, but they are going to come back, because that's life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Jannah when He says, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, right? That there will be no fear upon them, they will never be sad. That's Jannah. That's what we're working towards. He doesn't say that about the dunya. We're going to deal with it, and in dealing with it, we will need support. We will need, a safe place to talk about it, to figure it out. And, there's no shame in that. The Prophet ﷺ taught us du'as specifically. He wouldn't teach us the du'a if we wouldn't need it. If that, He wouldn't teach it to us. But it was a du'a that He made. The last du'a that, actually, we'll stop here, inshallah. I think we're good. But, so I want to reiterate this one, because it's a beautiful du'a. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught us how to ask of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our daily needs, because these are things we run into day in and day out. I might be happy today, I might hit a road bump tomorrow, I'll be sad. That's part of being human. And we have to learn to be okay with that. And we have to learn not to shy away from that. It doesn't make us weaker. It doesn't make us any less of a human or a person, or it doesn't make us any less successful if we acknowledge that these things exist. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us and facilitate balance for us in all aspects of our lives. Subhanakallah.